All right, so we're going to pick up where we left off. So we're still in 01A pilot training. Brian, how you doing today? Oh, man, I could have sworn I asked for these already. So here's the next slide, private pilot flight lesson content. I decided that we're a little bit behind, so I'm not going to test you on this. So you don't have to write any of this down. You don't even have to write those words down. I'm sorry if you're already writing. But if you go out for a flying lesson, there's maneuvers you do looking at the ground, like you pick a point and you fly around in a circle and you stay the same height and the same distance around it. The radius is the same even though the wind's blowing you. There's a couple other ground reference maneuvers that you would take during a typical flying lesson. You slow flight. Airplanes, if you fly them too slow, the wing doesn't generate enough lift and the airplane stalls and it loses altitude. Usually in little tiny airplanes, it's only 100 or 200 or 300 feet. So as long as you're cruising around 500 or 1,000 feet, it's not a big deal. But you usually practice this to get to know what the airplane feels like because it feels different when you are flying really slow. The controls get sluggish. They don't work as well. So you practice doing this so you can recognize that you're getting too slow. You actually practice stalls and how to recover them. You pull the throttle back, you pull the nose up. The wing stops getting enough lift and the nose breaks and you go, and you push the throttle forward and you let it dive and pick up a little airspeed. You practice this so you're really good at it, so in case it does happen, you'll know what to do about it. And all these things you got to do on your check ride. Practice a lot of takeoffs and landings. I personally like practice takeoffs and landings because I think landings is one of the trickiest things, especially if the wind's blowing you sideways. You're trying to come in and land on a runway and the wind's blowing you sideways and then the runway's over there. So I think that's a lot of fun. Or if the wind is blowing you sideways and then the wind stops. And then the wind blows you sideways and the wind stops. So it's gusting wind from the side. So the runway's going like this. And you're saying, oh man, that's fun. I think that's fun. So it's a challenge. You're going to have to solo of that 40 hours. You don't have to write this down. Only this write down right now. But 40 hours minimum, 70 hours that's typical to earn a pilot. So a private pilot certificate. Hours of it has to be yourself. Half of that 10 you go on cross countries. You'll go on a cross country with your instructor first. A cross country is where you go to another airport that's at least 50 nautical miles away. 100 nautical miles is the same as 115 statute miles in your car. So 50 nautical miles is 57 and a half statute miles, but it's straight line. So you go on a cross country or two with your instructor. You make sure you know how to do it, and then they let you solo and you go on cross countries by yourself. Woohoo! And then you try not to get lost. And we already talked about cross countries. And during those flying lessons, at the end, when the instructor thinks you're ready to go up for your practical test, they also have to decide if you're ready for the oral examination. So they're going to be quizzing you most lessons, or sometimes you'll come in and you'll sit down for an hour and not even fly, and the instructor will ask you lots of questions just to make sure you're going to be able to pass that oral exam. In theory, if you remember everything from ground school, you'll do really good on that review of aeronautical knowledge. Okay, now you need to start writing things down. So what do you get to do if you're a private pilot? What are the privileges that you have when you get that first pilot certificate? Well, you get to fly in the day and you get to fly at night. You don't have to write this down, but I mentioned it earlier. If you get a sport pilot certificate or a recreational pilot certificate, they don't let you fly at night. What a bummer. I remember when I was 17, maybe I was 18, they were doing that. They still did the fireworks at Reedley High School on the 4th of July and would fly around at 1,000 feet above, because it was a city, flying around at 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle and watch the fireworks come up. That was pretty fun. If you have a private pilot certificate, you cannot fly in the clouds. And in fact, we're going to talk about it on other days, but you actually have to stay a certain distance away from the clouds. And I won't get into it, but there's a certain amount of visibility here in the valley. We get a lot of smog. So sometimes you can't see very far in the smog. Good news is for little airplanes, usually the visibility is about 3 miles is what you have to have. And usually the smog isn't so bad you can't fly. But I've taken off and flown around here and you can only see about 5 or 6 miles just because of the smog's in the way. If you get your private pilot certificate, you're only going to get to fly airplanes that have one engine, and they can't weigh more than 12,500 pounds. 12,500 pounds? Has anybody ever ridden in one of those big giant pickup trucks? It's got like this huge 7-liter diesel, and it's got dualies in the back. It's got 4 wheels in the back instead of 2. Do you know how much that thing weighs if you load it up? Yeah, it's probably like 7,000 or 8,000 pounds. So a 12,500 pound airplane is pretty big, pretty heavy, especially since airplanes are made out of aluminum, not steel. So a 12,500 pound airplane, if depending on how they design it, it'll probably hold 10 people. So you can fly a pretty decent sized airplane. And of course, the biggest issue about private pilot is you can't get paid. I talked about that last time. You can share the expenses. If you share it evenly, it's called pro rata. If everybody pays the same amount, including you, you can do that, but you can't get paid to be there. Oh, yeah, I talked about it. There we go. Pro rata share. I'm using the word pro rata. I think it's Latin, and I wouldn't use it in there, but that's the words that the FAA wants to come out of your mouth when you're on your oral exam. Well, hey, you're a private pilot here pretty soon here, so can you charge people money? No. Well, can you share the expenses? Yeah. Well, how much do you have to pay? And the answer to the examiner will be, I must pay my pro rata share. Effectively means you have to pay the same amount as everybody else does. 4 people, you got to split it 4 ways. You got a 10-seat airplane, you can split it 10 ways. Any questions on this slide? All right, so once you get your pilot certificate, how do you keep it? Has anybody in here had a driver's license for more than 20 years? More than 30 years? More than 40 years? I'm the only person in the room that's had a driver's license for more than 40 years. And remember how it is in California, because I've been living in Arizona. You get your driver's license when you're 16. I'm not making this up. You don't have to come back in and take a driving test till you're 65. I'm not making that up. And in fact, if you don't send them a new picture, you can go online and say you lost your driver's license, and they will mail you a new one with whatever picture is still on file. So if you're 16, you get your picture on file, I'm not making this up, and then you're 36 and you lose your driver's license, which is pretty good. You didn't lose it for 20 years or it got worn out. They'll send you a picture, and it'll be a picture of you when you're 16. I love that, because I got my driver's license in Arizona when I was in my 40s, and now I'm in my 70s, so my driver's license makes me look pretty young. However, for flying airplanes, it's a different story. A pilot certificate never expires. You might not be able to use it, but that certificate doesn't have an end date on it. You don't have to write this part down. But a flight instructor certificate, it expires every 2 years. If you don't do what you need to after 2 years, your flight instructor certificate goes away. But not with a pilot certificate, so I like that. So you might stop flying for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. You can get it back pretty easy. Every 2 years you have to do a flight review. So right next to flight review, you're going to say go up with CFI every 2 years. So every 2 years you're going to go up with a CFI. Does anybody remember what CFI stands for? Certified Flight Instructor. So you got to go up with a Certified Flight Instructor once within the last 24 calendar months. It's actually 24 calendar months, not 2 years. But in any case, we'll get into that on another day, technicalities. And you have to fly with them until they think you're safe. So, and the minimum is at least an hour of ground where they ask you questions and an hour in the airplane. Now, at the end of that hour of ground and the hour in the airplane, if they don't think you remember enough stuff, they can say, we're going to have to go do this again. You don't flunk it. You just don't pass it. So what you're smart, if you do, is it's like 23 months since your last flight review. You go up with the flight instructor, and if they say, yeah, you're good, you go, sweet. And if they say, no, you need more practice with me, then you still got a month. You could still go flying with your friends for that last month until you hit 24 months. So you don't. There's no way to fail it. You just go up with the flight instructor until they say you're all right. You also have to have a valid medical certificate. I know it's hard to remember, but yesterday I talked about 3 kinds of medical certificates. Does anybody remember any of them? Yeah, first class, second class, and third class. Which one of these 3 do you have to get a private pilot certificate? Third class or higher. Third class or higher. If you get a third class medical and you're under 40 years old, it's good for 60 months. That's 5 years. So if you went out and got a medical today in August of 2017, it's good through the last day of August 2022. It's the last day of that 60th month. So what would you do? It's like, hey, it's the 20th. What's today? The 21st, 22nd. You go, I'm going to wait till September 1st. because that way at the end I'll get to the last day of September. I'll squeeze out 50.9 months. So we're going to talk some more about till the last day of the month on another day. If you want to go flying and by yourself, you can wait. Let's say you do your flight review in August of 2015, 24 months ago. That flight review is still valid all the way till the end of the month of this August, August 2017. If I didn't fly, if I went up with that flight instructor back in August of 15 and I never flew again, I could wait all the way till now, just before the end of August, and I could go flying. But I can't take any passengers with me unless within the last 90 days I've done 3 takeoffs and landings. So, when you say takeoffs and landings, if you carry passengers, you have to have done 3 takeoffs and landings in the last 90 days. So let's say I did wait. It's been almost 2 years since I had my last flight review, and I'm going to take my niece for a ride in an airplane. I'm going to have to go get in the airplane and do 3 takeoffs and landings by myself before I can take passengers. So I can go to the airport a half an hour, 30, 45 minutes early, do 3 takeoffs and landings, pow! I write it in my logbook, 3 takeoffs and landings, bing, now I can take people for rides. This is anywhere inside of the 2 years. So we have to comply with all of this at the same time. I have to have a flight review that was accomplished within the last 24 months. I have to have a valid medical certificate. If I've got a third-class medical, it's valid for 60 months if I'm under 40. If I want to take passengers, then I must have done 3 takeoffs and landings within the last 90 days before the flight with passengers. You have to comply with all of these things. What is it with a car? You get a driver's license. I know they got that provisional junk, but let's say you're 18 and all that provisional junk is gone. Can you stop driving for 10 years and then just jump in your car with your driver's license and go drive? How about in California, how long is your driver's license good for? After you get out of provisional? Forever? And like for 1,000 years after you're dead, it's still valid? Okay, your definition of forever and mine is different. Because for me, forever. Oh, okay, well, see, that's not very long away for me. When I die is a lot closer than when you die. You know, unless you die, you know, do you ride motorcycles? Okay, well, you might live longer than me then. Oh, well, see, you might break your neck in a motorcycle accident. It may be closer than you think. All right, so if you want to go flying, you got to have all these things. All right, so there's a really nice, some interesting videos that we could watch if we get to it. I will, what do you call it? I will show you. But in the meantime, we have got behind from the last couple of days. So I'm going to go straight into the next topic. If I get done early, we'll come back and watch a video or 2 off of YouTube. So I recommend in your notes you put in a space and then you write that title. This is 01B, Aviation Opportunities. After a while you figure out the 01 is referring to the chapter out of the textbook. And B is my way of knowing, okay, this is the second chunk out of the textbook. Now remember, tomorrow's quiz in this class will be from wherever we started up. So there's a couple of slides. But don't worry, I'll remind you tomorrow. So, I'm going to cover, pretty rapidly, aviation opportunities, effectively. So what can you do? What kinds of airplane? Notice I put the word airplane up there because there's a whole lot of other kinds of flying besides airplanes. But this is private pilot ground school for airplanes, so we're going to concentrate mostly on airplanes. By the way, Rodrigo, if you have questions about helicopters, I want you to ask me. Like you could say, well, if it costs $10 or $14,000 to get a private pilot airplane certificate, how much does it cost to get a helicopter private pilot certificate? You could ask me that question if you wanted to. Whatever it is for an airplane, it's about 2.5 times. So it's going to cost you 20 or 30 grand to get your private pilot certificate in a helicopter. The good news is you only have to have 150 hours to get your commercial certificate. You don't have to have 250. it's still going to cost you twice as much to become a professional. I'm not complaining. The last school I worked at, if you go online and type in guidance aviation, that's the helicopter pilot school I worked at. All the flight instructors worked for me because I could sit on them and they had to do what I say. So I was the boss. We had a big brawl one time. Pardon me? We had a big brawl one time, and I sat on everybody one by one, and they couldn't get out from under me. So they said, "Okay, fine, Uncle, you can be the boss." In any case, it's in Prescott, Arizona. So if you look at that flight school, that's where I used to work. In any case, so I did that for 8 years. I worked at a big helicopter flight school. So if you got questions about helicopter flying, I can pretend that I know what I'm talking about. In any case, we've already talked about this yesterday in aviation. What's that first job you're likely to get right out of pilot school? Certified Flight Instructor, CFI. Why do you want to become a Certified Flight Instructor right out of school? Anybody except Jared? To gain your hours. About how many hours can you become a co-pilot at an airline? No, it's going to take you 200, 250 to get your CFI. Anybody except Jaron and Josh? It's okay, I might not have told you. I probably didn't tell you to write it down. Yeah, you got to have 1,500 to get what kind of a pilot certificate? What kind of a pilot certificate requires 1,500 hours? TP, transport pilot certificate, takes 1,500 hours. So you get your CFI, you got about 250. You want to stop paying $130 an hour for the airplane. You want somebody else to pay that $130 an hour. So what do? You become a flight instructor and let them pay for it. And when you go flying as a flight instructor, you write the hours down in their logbook. And where else do you write those hours down? In your logbook. Same thing for helicopter pilots. It's identical, except that most helicopter pilots don't go to work for the airlines. You can usually get that first job after flight instructing at about 1,000 hours. But there are no helicopter airlines in the United States. There's a lot of charter. So here's a flight instructor and a student. The flight instructor is the old man in the FAR, the flight instructors in airplanes. And when I say old, he's probably younger than me. The flight instructors in little airplanes usually sit on the right-hand side, and the students sit on the left-hand side. This is, I'm looking at the inside of this airplane. This is almost for sure it's a Cessna 172 like we were flying in the sim yesterday. Okay, here's what you think, flight instructor. This is what you think you're going to look like. When you can always tell pilots by the size of their sunglasses. The bigger the sunglasses, the bigger the airplanes they wish they could fly. It's not how big of an airplane they are flying. It's just how big of an airplane they wish they were flying. So here's this flight instructor flying this little airplane around, and he wishes he could fly a really big airplane because he's got really big, giant sunglasses. Air taxi. Air taxi, you don't have to write this down, but it's also called charter. Like you call up an air taxi outfit in Fresno, and you say, hey, I want to fly me 4 people from Fresno. We want to go to Mammoth and go skiing this weekend, and I have way more money than I know what to do with. And it's illegal to spend it on cocaine, spend it on flying and skiing. And they go, hey, great, we have an airplane that'll hold, you want to take your ski equipment? Yeah, okay. An airplane, it'll hold 5 people and all your ski equipment, and it's going to be $800 to go there. It'll be $800 to fly back, and it's $50 an hour while the pilot's sitting around drinking hot cocoa at the ski resort while y'all are skiing. And you can say, awesome, can we do it tomorrow first? And they say, okay. So that's air taxi. You call somebody up, and they'll fly you pretty much anywhere you want to go. It's not scheduled like an airline. It's not. That's really one of the big differences between air taxi and airlines. Airlines, this is when we're going. If there's a seat, we'll sell you the ticket. If there's no seats, too bad. If we don't have a flight, too bad. Air taxi, it's the other way around. Oh, you want to go there? This is how much it is. It's very expensive. So here's a picture that I typed up air taxi on the internet to find a picture, and somebody actually has a yellow painted airplane that says air taxi on it. This is the very first time I've ever seen a yellow painted airplane that said air taxi. And you'll notice the N numbers, the registration numbers, are Yankee Juliet. This is not the United States. In the United States, the first letter is N. In Canada, the first letter is C. In Great Britain, the first letter is G. In In China, the first letter is C. And Mexico, does anybody know the first letter in Mexico at the end numbers? X-ray. Somebody else got M first, I don't know. In any case, this actually, including the pilot seat, that actually has 8 seats in it. There's actually 4 rows of seats, 2 people in a row, and it's got a 400 horsepower engine. I've actually, not a yellow painted one, but I've seen these airplanes. This is like a big giant 172 that holds 8 people instead of 4. Here's another airplane. This is a Pilatus PC-12. It's made in Switzerland. They're new. They're about $2.5 million. They'll go about 300 miles an hour, and including the pilot, I think if you max it out, you can get 11 people in it. Right? Yeah, that's why I'm so well prepared. What I'm actually doing with these videotapes is that I'm putting them online, videotapes, with these videos. I guess I could show you today before you leave how to access them. So there's a big old, I think it's a 777. I'm not sure. In any case, you might go to work for a corporation and fly biz jets. You could be it's called being a corporate pilot. Has anybody thought about being a corporate pilot? Corporate pilots, big companies buy business jets that hold anywhere from 5 to 20 people. You know, they go 500 miles an hour just like an airliner. But you get a plane, you fly you fly to Boston, whoever, from Fresno to LA, and then you sit at the airport for 6 hours while they have a meeting. You can't drink any alcohol. And then when they come back or in the afternoon, you get in the airplane. Of course, they're drinking alcohol in the back of the airplane, but you still have to stay sober to fly back to Fresno. Or you're in a big biz jet and you fly to New York City and you stay there for 3 days. And they say, be back here in 3 days. And you go, woohoo, New York City for 3 days. Yeah. I mean, you got to get a good night's sleep the night before the flight. But 3 days in New York City, that doesn't sound so terrible, does it? Has anybody ever been to New York City? Do they make pretty good picante sauce there? You've never tried picante sauce made in New York City? Pace Picante used to have an advertisement where they had some cowboy from Texas looking at it. This is made in New York City. And then everybody got upset at the person who had bought that. And then they said Pace, they make it in Texas where they know how to make picante sauce. And I thought, well, what happened to Cholula or Jalisco? I mean, I bet you. Who's been making picante sauce longer? People that live in Mexico or people that live in Texas? Huh? You are correct. That's excellent because big chunks of Texas used to be Mexico. But I don't think tomatoes were naturally growing in Texas. Did you say half of the U.S. used to be Mexico? Yeah, a big chunk. I mean, we're standing on former Mexican soil, aren't we? Did we win it in a war, or did we buy it? I took California history in the 1950s when I was in high school, so I don't remember it really well. In any case, here's a picture of a very common corporate turboprop. This thing actually has jet engines, but instead of blowing exhaust out the tailpipe, the jet engines drive propellers. You don't have to write this down. This is a Beech King Air. I would argue that this is the most popular twin-engine, propeller-driven airplane that's used in corporate flying. This is a smaller one. It'll hold 2 pilots. It only needs 1. But it's got 2 seats in the front. Usually the pilot flies it by himself. And then in the back, there's usually seats for 4 to 6. 4 if there's a toilet and a bar. 6 if you leave out the toilet. But nobody ever leaves out the bar for some reason. But they make King Airs big enough you can put 12 people and a toilet. This one weighs around 10 or 11,000 pounds, but they make bigger versions with bigger engines that weigh 15, 16,000 pounds. And they're very common corporate airplanes. Brian? You need a commercial pilot with an instrument. The airplane you're going to fly has 2 or more engines. When you get your commercial certificate, you usually do that in a single-engine airplane because it's cheaper. Then you go take some flying in. Commercial pilot. Get a commercial pilot. And then on the back side it'll say single engine airplanes. But you go take another oral practical. There's no written test for it. You take an oral practical, and if you pass it, it'll say single engine airplanes, and then it'll say multi-engine airplanes. And it's not like you don't have to have an airline transport pilot certificate to be a corporate pilot. And I haven't talked to enough people. I've been in the helicopter business for the last 8, 9 years. So I'm on corporate flying, and what does that co-pilot need? But I bet it's less than 1,500 hours because they're sucking up pilots into the airlines like crazy. So I'm thinking the corporate people are having lower and lower minimums to get in as a co-pilot. Legally, you can be a co-pilot with a commercial engine and an instrument, and you can do that at 250 hours. With corporations, it's more who you know to get that first job than it is just applying like everybody else. Here's a Grumman Gulfstream. You don't have to write this down, but the Gulfstream, you can buy a Gulfstream like this. Now, if they put it airline style, it would hold like 35, 40 people, but they never set it up airline style because they have a bathroom with gold-plated toilet seats. They got a bar in the front, they got a bar in the back, they got a flight attendant, they got 2 pilots. This thing will go 600 miles an hour. You can take off out of Fresno and go to Hawaii. Or you can take off out of Fresno City with blinking an eye. In fact, there's one version of this jet that you can take off out of Fresno and go to Hawaii without stopping. Yeah, you better take a third pilot. But then they make out the interior. It would hold 35, 40 people airline style. Nah, they put in chairs and couches for like 10 people. And then they have to have a flight attendant to serve all the food and liquor. I mean, every biz jet doesn't have a bar. Okay, I'm making that up. I'm sure every biz jet has a bar in it. So that's corporate flying. So if somebody says corporate jet or corporate pilot, it could be as small as this. Technically, it could be smaller, but usually it's not. And it could be as big as this. And these people make as much as airline pilots. You could be a crop duster. This is an air tractor. They actually put a turbine engine in there with a propeller on it. And it's hard to tell. That's not actually the distance. This is down here. So this airplane's probably about 8, 10 feet off the ground doing 100 miles an hour spraying chemicals. So if you want to fly low and with your eyes wide open, this would be a great job. Yes? There are helicopter crop dusters, absolutely. Yeah, helicopter crop dusting is awesome. They'll fly down, do a row, and then they'll pull it up, and they'll use gravity to slow them down, and at the top, they kick in the rudder pedal, and the helicopter rotates down. It's awesome. Yeah, helicopter crop dusting. Yeah, the one next to it? Okay, so you know somebody that knows somebody who hired a helicopter pilot to crop dust? Okay. And then, of course, you could join the United States military. Here's some F-22s. That's not the latest fighter. The F-35 is the latest fighter, but these are pretty awesome. They'll go Mach 2 for they'll go Mach 2 for like 500, 800 miles. I mean, Mach 1. They're designed to fly supersonic the whole time. They're really awesome. The radar deck can't pick them up. You can fly a cargo plane in the military. This is the U.S. Air Force's newest cargo plane. It's a C-17. You can put like 3 big old honking tanks in it. It's really big inside. You can play basketball in there. Pretty easy. And, well, I don't know. The ceiling's only about 20 feet high, so I suppose if you're doing like a three-pointer from way out, you might hit the ceiling. I guess, you know. All right. So I'm sure there are other types of flying, but we don't have time to cover all of them. I do want to talk about a few aviation organizations, and for some reason it's pulling them in backwards. So I'm just going to put them all in there. For some reason it put them in backwards. Is there one more? There we go. Yeah, I just want you don't have to write. I want you to just write down the blue parts. Just write down the blue parts. I'm going to ask you to write that verbatim, word for word, letter to letter on the test. Just kidding. First, I'm going to talk about the AOPA. On the test, I'm going to say, what does AOPA stand for? It's a 4-letter abbreviation for Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. If you're nice, they will give you a 6-month subscription to their trip magazine because you're a pilot student. Yeah, you want free magazine. So this to me by the end of the day. Don't worry, I'll remind you. You got one? You have that? You got your 6 months for free? Okay. I'll put them all together and throw them in an envelope for you, and I'll mail it if you want. You already got one? Okay, fine. See if I care. Look at that piece of tree I killed just for you, Jonathan. No, I killed it for Brian, too. In any case, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. Let me back up. Has anybody ever heard of the NRA, the National Rifle Association? They're a lobbying organization, and they try to convince lawmakers in Washington, D.C. to change laws the way they believe that their members would like. Well, it's the same for the AOPA. They go to Washington and they lobby lawmakers to change aviation laws to the way they think people that belong to it. But they have really good insurance. If you have a medical problem, you can call them. There's a whole, I could talk here for an hour, things that AOPA does. But if you want to get an airplane magazine for free, I'll remind you to give that to me before you're done. Next one is the EAA. EAA stands for 3 words: Experimental Aircraft Association. Experimental Aircraft Association. Now what you ought to do in your notes is write in Young Eagles Google search and go in there and type in Young Eagles Find a Flight. If you type in Young Eagles Find a Flight, it will go to their webpage and you can put in a zip code and it'll tell you who to contact for the nearest member of EAA about getting a free airplane ride. Because the EAA, now Experimental Aircraft Association, you don't have to write that. They got started because they were people that were designing and building their own airplanes in their garage and then flying them and not dying. That's how it got started. But there are also a lot of people who are members of the EAA that aren't building their own airplane. They just like flying machines. Now what the EAA is doing to get more people in aviation is giving kids. It's giving young adults under 18 and younger free airplane rides. Like Jonathan got a ride with Mr. Enns, and he's hit 200. He's given 200 people 18 years and younger an airplane ride in his airplane. 99s is a group it's a club for women pilots. So you can join 99s, have a second operation, and then you can be a full member. Not that I'm recommending that. If you want to talk to your family doctor, I'm not an expert. The ALPA is the Airline Pilots Association. It's the Airline Pilots Association. They're a group of people, most of whom are on behalf of it. So if you think you want to grow up and be an airline pilot, you might want to go type in ALPA and do a Google search and see if you can join. I've never done that. This last one, CAP, stands for Civil Air Patrol. CIVIL, Civil Air Patrol. And there's one in Fresno. And they got a cadet program for people that are 18 years and younger, and you get to wear a uniform, and you get to march, and you get to go to ground school, and you get to sit in the back seat of the airplane and look out the window during search and rescue operations, and if you're really, really nice, you get to sit in the front seat and fly. Familiar with, if you're really interested in aviation and you want to get started as soon as you can, I would type in Civil Air Patrol Fresno and make a call or send an email. Of course, you got to go to Fresno to do that stuff. They have a 4-seat airplane. It's a 182. It's bigger than a 172. Goes a little faster, carries more weight. So those are the aviation organizations. All right. So you can get more certificates. I've talked about if you get a private pilot certificate, you can get an instrument rating on top of it. Or you can get a commercial certificate. But you got to get something on your certificate when you want to fly a different kind of airplane. So ASEL stands for Airplane Single Engine Land. Airplane Single Engine Land. And 99% of the people learn in the United States, that's what they learn to fly in. It's an airplane, it's got a single engine in it, and it's designed to take off and land on the land. So it's got wheels and tires. So I already showed you a picture of a different Pilatus PC-12. So you can fly anything, you don't have to write this down, but if you do that, you can fly anything that's up to 12,500 pounds. It's got one engine, and it takes off and land on a runway. So these airplanes are designed to be a little bit less than 12,500 pounds. Then there's ASES, Airplane Single Engine Sea, SEA, as in ocean. Airplane Single Engine Sea, SEA, as in ocean. So if you get your private pilot certificate, Airplane Single Engine Land, and you say, well, I want to fly on an airplane with floats, or I want to fly on an amphibious airplane, you don't have to take another written test, but you got to go take another oral practical. Here's a Republic CB. It seats 4 people. It goes about 150 miles an hour. And on this one, the airplane fuselage, the body of the airplane, actually lands in the water. And the engine's up here and the propeller's in the back. This is a pretty old school airplane. There's probably only 200 or 300 or 400 of these still flying. AMEL stands for Airplane Multi-Engine Land. Multi is M-U-L-T-I. M-U-L-T-I. Airplane Multi-Engine Land. So if you want to do the least expensive route to becoming a professional pilot, you're going to get your private, your instrument, and your commercial single-engine land and get your CFI and turn around and start teaching people in single-engine airplanes. But if you want to be a professional pilot, at some point you're going to have to get your commercial airplane multi-engine land so you can fly this King Air because it's got 2 or more engines. Most of the tech ride is, what do you do if one engine quits? You go, ah, and then you do some things and then you live. And you actually don't have to say, ah, when the engine quits. But that's the way I teach it when I teach people that. AMES, Airplane Multi-Engine Sea, SEA. So if you want to fly aircraft that take off and land on the water, and it's got 2 engines, you got to go take another check ride. And here's a nice picture for Airplane Multi-Engine Sea. This is actually a Beech 18. If you put it together airline style, you could put a total of 8 people in it, including the 2 pilot seats. I know you won't believe this, but the summer I turned 17, I went to work at Paris Valley Airport in Southern California. It was a parachute drop zone, and they had a beat-up old one of these that they had taken parts off because it was never going to fly, and the owner let me live in it. They had just put in new bathrooms and showers and a swimming pool, so I could shower at the bathroom. I ran an extension cord out to there so I could have an alarm clock and a light. And there was a refrigerator, and this is before they invented microwaves. So I just lived out of the refrigerator and out of the shower in the bathroom. And then on Tuesdays, I would ride my Honda 360 motorcycle into town and do my laundry. And they paid me $10 a day, which was awesome because I didn't have to pay rent. But it was in one of it didn't have floats. All right, you can learn to fly helicopters. If you want to learn to fly helicopters, Rodrigo, you want to fly in a Robinson R-22. This is the least expensive helicopter out there, and almost every flight school, I'd say 9 out of 10 have this helicopter. So if you want to turn around and get a job as a flight instructor, you want to do it in an aircraft that most flight schools have. Instead of $130 an hour, this is $250 to $300 an hour, plus $60 an hour for the instructor. Yeah, I know, it's funny. When I got out of airplane mechanic school in 1980 here at Reed College, I couldn't get a job as a flight instructor. Nobody was taking flying lessons. The airlines weren't hiring. Nothing. Fortunately, I had my mechanic certificate. A couple of my friends who graduated, Jeff Zweigel and Pat Martin, they went down to LA and got a job working at the factory, and that was my first job out of mechanic school, was building Robinson R-22 helicopters many years ago. And then I took helicopter flying lessons in a Robinson R-22, and I did not crash or hit anything. You can fly a glider. It's hard to make money flying a glider. About the only thing you can do in a glider for pay is be a flight instructor. Interesting enough, you notice this glider does not have an engine. You either can get towed up by an airplane, you can have a tow rope. They put a big honking V8 engine with a winch on it, and then the wheel spins around and it pulls you on a wire that's 3,000. I'm making this up. That's more than a half a mile away. It pulls you get up to about 30 miles an hour. You pull the nose up, and when you get about 1,500 feet, you let go of the line, so you're at 1,500 feet. And if there's some rising air, you can stay up for an hour or two. They also have self-launching gliders where they put motors on. And then blimps. Oh, I don't think I got a picture of a blimp. I actually have a former student at a school I taught. He became an airplane pilot, but he ended up getting hired, and he flies blimps for Goodyear. Sorry, I forgot to get a picture of a blimp. And then balloons. Same thing with balloons. You could be a flight instructor, but there's some companies like in Phoenix. They do balloon rides, and there's 2 or 3 small companies in Phoenix, and they do that every Saturday and Sunday. They take champagne. After they land, they drink the champagne. And they have big gondolas with like 10 people, so the balloon is huge. I got a picture. I think this is in Monument Valley, Utah. It's hard to see those people, but I think there's 4 people in that gondola. Yes, the gondola is made out of fiber, like baskets. And then you can fly a gyroplane. You're going, what in the heck is a gyroplane? A gyroplane is a cross between a helicopter and an airplane. I'll show you a picture of a gyroplane. It's got a propeller like an airplane that pushes it along, but it's got rotor blades like a helicopter. It just can't land, and it can't sit in one spot like a helicopter can. You have to use a runway. You got to take off and land like a runway. But it'll fly really, really slow, and there are not very many of them because you might as well just buy an airplane because they're cheaper. And then, of course, the last one is remote pilot. So here's a nice Air Force drone. Interestingly enough, a lot of the drones being flown for the United States military are flown by government contractors. So if you get your commercial airplane pilot certificate and an instrument rating, you can get a job. You go down to Mojave Desert, and they teach you how to fly this thing. This thing is almost, is this the one? It's almost as big as a 737. It's actually really big. And you fly it inside of a room, and they have satellite links, and you can fly it over Afghanistan and drop bombs and missiles from the comfort of Palmdale, California. I'm not making this up. Not that I want to drop bombs and kill people. You can also fly little tiny drones and take pictures. Because if you want to fly little tiny quadcopters and get paid money, you have to have a remote pilot certificate. And there's actually a 1-credit class. We are going to, before this semester is over, we're going to be flying. Actually, our quadcopters are noticeably smaller than that one. But if you're doing it for educational purposes, you don't have to have a pilot certificate. But since I'm getting paid to teach you that, I have to have a remote pilot certificate, so I took the test. And that's going to have to be enough for one day. So it's we'll say it's 16 after, so we'll meet back in here. We'll say at 27 after on that clock. 27 after on that clock, and there's somebody I need to see at break. Yes.